Hello, Commanders, and welcome to today's podcast on Commanders Hub. I'm Panic, your faithful community manager, and with us today we have Designer Dunsel, Designer Data, and Designer Darmok, who are going to be talking to us about a new awesome ship that's coming into the galaxy and a new research tree as well. But before we get into those all that cool stuff, hey guys, how are you, Designer Dunsel? How's it going?
Hey, it's going very well, Panic. Thanks for having us on.
Awesome, cool to hear. And Designer Data, how's it going?
Data here. Hey, Panic. Great to be here.
It's good to have you. Good to have you back, and obviously, and a new voice with us today. We have designer Darmok. How are you doing? And thanks for joining us today.
You're very welcome, Panic. Thank you for having me on board. I'm very excited about finally getting to talk to everyone about what we're bringing into the game.
Awesome. How's everyone doing? Like with the whole quarantine, everyone is taking it well. Have adapted to the new kind of normality.
I mean, being a kind of a bit of a hardcore gamer myself, I just feel I've been training my entire life for this moment. So not having had to have an excuse to why you're staying in and playing games all day is actually working out pretty well for me.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. I have a lot of friends as well. We actually got back into a lot of previous games that we had stopped playing, and it's been fun. Now that the weather's getting better, though, it's happily going out, but that's for sure.
Working from home still seems to work for us as a team. So that's great to see. So it's mainly just missing your team members. We have a very strong bond within the team, and just coming in the mornings, it's always a pleasure. Not being able to do that, not being able to play together after work or just sit together for a beer, is unfortunate. But all in all, I consider myself lucky that in a crazy situation like that, we are able to work from home and we're not forced into any difficult situation at the moment.
Yeah, the social aspect. We talked a lot about that with designer Keenser in one of our previous podcasts. Is that the team is still doing well? Like we're still doing a lot of cool stuff, fixing a lot of the issues, releasing a lot of cool content. So productivity has not dropped, but yeah, that family feeling that we had is kind of the longing that we want during this quarantine. But hey, at some point, it's definitely created some new cool routines. So cool. Let's actually get into the content itself. So we have Stella, the new ship, which is essentially Harry Mudd's wife's ship, and yeah, and this is coming into the to the galaxy. So can you just give us a bit of information of like the makings of the ship itself?
I mean, I think that we should just touch on, what you exactly said there, that the Stella, it's Harry Mudd's ship coming. It is named after his wife. I think that anyone who's familiar with the lore around Harry Mudd will understand that it's kind of a double-edged sword. There are elements of him saying, "Hey, this is the only woman I've ever loved," and so of course, it makes sense for him to name a ship after his wife. But then also there's elements of him further on in the timeline talking about the nagging of his wife is the thing that drove him deeper and deeper into space and to further his life of crime. So I think it's very interesting to have that kind of dual side of the ship, and I think that it will be interesting to have everyone have their own opinion on why it's actually named that.
So that's really cool. So the fact that we have this contrast between Harry Mudd and his wife and double-edged sword that you mentioned, uh, does this fit at all in the actual mechanics of the ship, the narrative that you just talked about?
I mean, I think that everything is kind of interlinked together. Like none of our teams are working in a silo. So a lot of the time in thinking about the narrative of ship and the Stella is something that has been hinted about existing in the episodes of the original series Star Trek around there being a ship called Stella that Mudd was using as his kind of cargo ship and personnel transport, and so we kind of riffed off that a little bit. And of course, when you're talking about elements of the ship design itself, you can't help but think about, hey, it would be cool if the ship, was very good at doing certain things related to the show and how it features there. So, from at least from a top level, there is an intention that all of these things are linked together, and sometimes the narrative can drive the design, but also the other way round. Sometimes the design can drive the narrative.
Cool. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is uh, Designer Darmok is you talked a bit about the uniqueness of the ship, and I'd like if you can just talk to us about that a bit more, like the design of it as well, like what makes it unique and what, yeah.
Sure. So, when players see the Stella for the first time, they'll notice it's got a design that looks unlike any other ship that we currently have on the game. And this really is kind of our way of representing that Mud is a bit of a unique fellow himself. And in designing the look of this ship, we kind of went with three major pillars. One, we wanted it to look fun. Two, we wanted it to look expensive because we know that Mud is very affluent. And also, number three, we wanted it to be very flamboyant. And so looking at all those pillars, we kind of, we really like to use real world influence for a lot of what we're putting into the game or to spawn ideas. And when we were looking at these pillars, kind of what brought us to mind was kind of real world yachts and all of the things that are sitting in the kind of the bay in Monaco, that all of the kind of very expensive super yachts that sit there. That would be the kind of thing that if Mud existed in the real world, he would definitely be owning one of those. And so in looking at those yachts, we kind of realized that what makes them unique is this kind of like this idea of sails. And so in the design of the ship, we very much kind of leant down that avenue, and we were like, how do we represent sails in kind of the Star Trek world? And so we worked very closely with CBS on this, and we kind of settled on something in the end that kind of ends up being kind of like the combination of a speedboat, a yacht, and a spaceship that has come out looking kind of very sleek and sophisticated and high tech. And a lot of this is due to kind of Mud's character himself. He's a person who likes to show off, and someone who would definitely have a ship with a luxury finish. And we use the word peacocking a lot, and it's about how Mud would be a character who would like to show off his wealth and the fact that he'd stolen it from someone. And then in going down that avenue, we ended up actually literally thinking about peacocking and peacock feathers. And so the kind of the sail fins on the ship itself are very much representative of peacock feathers themselves. And I think what we've ended up with something that looks kind of very over the top in terms of existing Star Trek ships, but is still cool and something that we hope is very desirable for our player base.
So that's really cool to hear. So you're telling me that I can build this beautiful ship and then I have to scrap it at the same time. So
you get the beautiful ship back each time.
Yeah, exactly.
Is the guarantee that we will give you.
Thanks for that answer. It's a really cool way of seeing how a designers look at when building these kind of content. Awesome. And so when building the ship out of the narrative itself, was also the way of building her. Is there anything that has changed or anything that the commander should know specifically about it?
When we were thinking around the Stella and the kind of ship that we thought Harry Mudd would have, as someone who is kind of like a con man and a smuggler, but also kind of very flamboyant, a normal ship would not be something that you'd expect Harry Mudd to have. And so this ship is going to feel very different to other ships, both visually and also how it operates as well. So in narrative terms, like the Stella is basically an engineering marvel. And what is the marvel side of that is the fact that it's very modular, the ship. And so narratively, kind of, we're talking about a ship where it has lots of different components, and each component obviously works in unity with the other components because it's a spaceship that has to work. But also it can be switched in and out at will. So essentially, what Mudd has managed to create here is a ship that kind of creates different warp signatures every time he uses it and every time he rebuilds it. And so it allows him to pull off heists and be, the best con man that the galaxy has ever seen. And it's kind of he's managed to achieve the impossible with this ship, a highly identifiable ship because it looks very unique in kind of comparison to other ships. But he's also made it completely untraceable through traditional tracking technology. So that is kind of like the aim and the narrative behind the ship, and we've kind of then tried to lean into that a little bit with the mechanics of how a player is actually upgrading and playing with that ship.
So what does that mean from a pure mechanic side? The Stella is all about repurposing it. Harry Mudd achieves that by taking the ship into the job shop. And the more XP he has gathered beforehand on the ship, the bigger the outcome for him in the end. So it does mean, as a player, I will build the ship quite a lot, and I will scrap the ship quite a lot. And we will talk about how the ship and how the outcome of the scrapping mechanic will lead into the research tree.
And just from a technical point of view, now, if I'm not mistaken, the players have to first, they will get a mission unlocked once the content comes into the game, the Outlaws Part 2 comes into the game, and then they have to at some point use the new research tree, which we will be talking about later, and at some point they'll be able to unlock a node where they can then build the ship.
You'll need the node on the research tree to construct the ship, and you'll also need to acquire the blueprints separately. They'll be free available in the Outlaws part 2 as
Okay.
part of the free battle pass, I believe.
Yes, and by using the battle pass. And what was the logic behind having the ship being released like this?
The real reason behind it was that we acknowledge that as players get new ships in our game, maybe the first couple of tiers or the first 3 tiers that you're upgrading it happen kind of reasonably quickly. But as you're getting new ships, it can take longer and longer for it to happen. And so those really exciting moments of kind of upgrading a ship, getting a new ability, taking it out into the galaxy, and understanding what the new version can do, happen kind of further and further apart. So really, we wanted to kind of go back to basics with the design of this ship and kind of introduce it in a way that gets that kind of good feeling and that kind of, hey, I'm now undocking this ship, there's something new about it, I'm not quite sure about what the abilities are, and go and experiment with it in space. And so by having this loop where you're getting a ship, you're going out, you're using it, you're gathering XP, and then you're very quickly coming back, scrapping it, and going again with that, we're providing a much more regular opportunity for players to have that excitement of driving their new ship into space.
And just to touch a bit about on that XP part, just so make sure. So the way that players will gather XP with the ship is by killing the new hostiles and also killing out the new outlaw armadas.
So you will gather XP all across the new loop, of course, but most of the XP you will gather in a single player combat, not against the armadas itself. We have intentionally divided that to make sure that the armada part of the outer loop is a fun engagement play with your friends, and then the XP gathering itself can be done on your own as well.
So like, how does the Stella match up against the armada targets overall? Like, will the Stella have to kind of arm itself with another 3 commanders to be able to get these armadas down, or if she reaches a certain level, will she be able to kind of down these armadas on her own? How does it work?
So the power progression on the Stella is kind of unique and something new that we're trying in the game. The majority of the power of the ship is going to come not from necessarily tearing it up, but more so from the research tree that will accompany it with the Outlaws loop. So the initial node where you unlock the Stella that is required to build it also provides the standard ability that we've seen on ships like the Franklin and the Vidar, where the Stella will deal new damage against these Eclipse targets. So as players progress and tier up the ship and then scrap it for parts, they'll be able to progress also in the research tree, which makes it more powerful. So the next time you tier it up, it'll be more powerful against the Eclipse targets if you do the research.
Gotcha. And would you suggest the players use the Stella for any other reasoning apart from killing the new outlaw targets and the armadas, or was she specified just for this purpose?
Yeah, these bonuses will apply to the new Armada targets that are in Eclipse space and the new hostiles that you're going to be killing daily in the Outlaws space.
I mean, as with any ship, our players always constantly amaze us with their clever and ingenious ways of using existing ships in ways that we hadn't thought of as designers. So I expect that, as with most of the other ships that we release, that there'll be some interesting ways that the Stella will be useful elsewhere throughout the galaxy. However, in terms of how we've designed it and how we're looking at where the main value is, it will very much be in the kind of like the new activities that have just been explained.
I want to touch a bit on that. Out of curiosity, when building content within the game, especially from a mechanical point of view, is there any point in the brainstorming session where you guys allow freedom for players if to do more things than expected? Right, more like, again, I guess I would explain it as creating more of a sandbox-y kind of game mechanic, right? Or are the new mechanics that players do just unexpected?
I think that we try and keep a balance in all things because with every sandbox that you create with a game, yes, I think a lot of the time it can sound like a great experience when you're giving kind of players full freedom to explore a world in the way that they want to, without rules, without systems kind of holding them back. However, in reality, a lot of the time what that makes is for a very kind of loose experience where you're not being able to understand how certain elements of the game work or how a feature works, and you're not really sure what you get out of it for you. So I think the way that we always try and look at design is how can we provide a good balance and give players the freedom that they need to kind of experiment and have fun with the tools that we're providing them. And by tools, I mean things like ships and crofts and research trees, but not make it so loose that we actually we're just throwing a load of things into this game world without really much explanation of how they should be used.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think we really done a good job with the officers themselves, and I think a lot of the player theory crafting is based on that. And but yeah, it would be good. Like again, more content comes into the game, more ships coming into the game, so more possibilities for an officer style mechanic to be implemented to there. But again, food for thought kind of thing.
Yeah, actually, just on that note specifically, I think it's very interesting to see the theory crafting that goes on, and I play the game a lot myself, and I don't always have the time to work out exactly which is the best officer, so I'm always going and looking either on Discord or Reddit to try and find out who's found out the most optimum use of officers. So that's something that we want to maintain in the game. And as you say, like going further down the line, we would love to introduce new ways that allow players to theory craft with our systems. If they're really kind of like into them, but at the same time make those systems accessible to new players or players who perhaps don't necessarily have the time to do the theory crafting and are just happy picking up that information from other people who do.
Cool. So let's go to the next point. So I wanted to talk a bit about the new mechanic, which is very interesting to me, is about scrapping. I know one point here to make is that the higher tier the Stella is, the more resources you gain out of it. But what should players expect, and what kind of resources do you acquire once you scrap the Stella?
The scrapping mechanic works very closely to the scrapping mechanic that we already have inside the game. It's just that the output is different. The output normally was more of a diminishing return of the initial investment of a ship. And that's fine. If you want to go to the next grade of ships, then the old ship was able to give you a leg. But the Stella in itself is able to give you real in-game value as you're progressing through the loop. Now, the direct connection, of course, is the patterns that are coming out of the scrapping that you can then take into the research tree in order to get better research for the Stella in order to improve the Stella further. But you also further get access to other research, which is not only for the Stella, but improves your overall game performance. We have quite a lot of really interesting research in this tree.
So, since the scrapping now is something that the seller is going to be doing over and over again, is there any way where players can actually reduce the amount of time for that scrapping?
Well, actually, with the Stella, we specifically designed it so that she would be scrapping it repeatedly. You'll find that the actual scrap timer on it is quite quick compared to other ships of that level in that range. Additionally, the new Outlaws research will have an increase across the board for scrapping speeds. There'll be faster times, obviously. So it's part of our commitment to allowing players to scrap more freely and more the way that they would like to.
So we have a new research tree with a lot of more cool stuff that are coming into it, right? So I just wanted like the Galaxy research tree came in back in November, and there was a lot of awesome stuff that was introduced within that tree itself. So with this tree, is there anything? What was the thought process behind it once building this tree itself?
So this is obviously the first real direct faction tree that we're introducing here right now. And with the team, we really wanted to get back and introduce something that we haven't done so far. So we have been thinking about what is currently needed inside the game in terms of bonuses and buffs, but also how can we make the experience of research tree more interesting? And there's quite a few concepts in that tree that we are really interested in how our players will react to it. So one, as said, is a faction tree. And it's actually between two sides. It's Harry Mutt and it's Khan. And the player at times will be able to choose within the research tree what side he's rather siding with. In addition, we are talking about the prestiging nodes of the Stella, and we are talking about quite a lot of really interesting nodes for all of our players.
I'd like to touch on this new ability where players can now choose which path they'd like to take within the tree, either Harry Mudd or Khan. And when choosing a path, will they have some sort of new advantage? And what advantage would that be?
We want to make this an equal but interesting choice. So generally, I wouldn't say that you are generally stronger on one side. Now, our players will tell us differently, trying around and finding some combination that tells us otherwise. I fully expect that. But I do think that they are rather equal in terms of the balancing. However, they are different in terms of theming. Khan is more aggressive, is more damage related, where Harry Mutt is more caring about shield defense and hull HP.
I think an important thing to add here as well is just that we like the idea of giving players interesting choices, but we also don't want players to have this anxiety of feeling that they're missing out altogether by making a certain choice one way or the other. So ultimately, both sides of the tree will be completable by players.
Your research tree. So, is there any key nodes which are unique to this tree itself that make it unique?
Quite a lot, actually. We are heavily looking at the player feedback whenever we are creating new content. So one of the most requested nodes or most requested bonuses were around G4. G4 repair efficiency and G4 impulse speed. Both will be accessible within the tree. But not only that, it will be the first tree and first bonuses that we're giving when it comes to material upgrade costs for both modules and research. That is pretty big. In addition to that, we're also having additional upgrade cost efficiency for components for both titanium and dilithium, and quite a lot of nodes that are related to Armada combat, all of which we expect quite a lot. The first part of the research tree, before the unlock of the Stella, the research tree is very much focused on the current established augment loop, and there are several improvements that we are adding for the botany bay. This includes protected cargo, for example, or additional HHP. So we're basically starting out on the botany bay side. We are speeding up the botany bay, especially when going to the mine. We are increasing the safe cargo on the botany bay, and then in addition, we have upgrade cost efficiencies for plutonium. Now, there's also, apart from the augment loop, additional efficiency for parts, which is very liked by players. The tree continues into three main sections. Those three main sections are the sections where the player is making a choice. He's either going with Khan or he's going with Harry Mutt. As said before, every player will be able to complete the tree, but there's initial choice in the research that the player is completing first. What we're seeing here mainly are the research nodes are related to the Stella itself. Those increase the efficiency within the loop and the stats of the Stella itself. In addition, we are also seeing the first material efficiency research. We're looking at the crystal cost efficiency for both modules and for research. If we continue further, we're then looking at additional crit chance within the outlaw loop and crit damage within the outlaw loop. In the next section, we see a lot of the nodes being related to the defense platforms. It's a further way for all players to defend themselves and defend their stations. And the last section, in my eyes, is one of the most interesting ones. Now, in addition to the additional material cost efficiencies, we're also looking at additional bonuses for armadas, and this is also absolutely new in research trees, we're looking at dedicated new missions that are only unlockable through the research tree. And here again, depending on the choice of Khan versus Harry Mutt, you will get access to that mission first.
Once the Outlaws loop is over, but players might have not reached those nodes yet in the tree, they will still be able to enjoy those missions once, if unlocked after the Outlaws loop. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Those missions are not timed, they are fully tied to the research tree, and players can unlock them at their own very own pace.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, a lot of a lot of new stuff coming in. I'm really curious to see the conversations that we're going to be having with the players on the tree itself and all the different kind of nodes which are and how they're going to be unlocking them. I expect some kind of crazy mix and matching going on at some point, but yeah, I'm curious to see what's going to happen. A lot of the feedback we take from players, we always try to find ways, as a team, and a lot of the conversations that I have with all your designers is the question is how to implement this feedback within the game. It's not always like either black or white. It's not as if we can just like switch it on and suddenly we have all these new things in the game. And what kind of improvements have we implemented within the stream?
Some of the favorite research nodes that I'd like to highlight are specific improvements for G4 ship impulse speed and G4 ship repair costs. In addition to that, there will be some low-level nodes that are for everybody, like improved warp speed. And we're doing the warp speed one in a special way, where the method for unlock will be events during the launch period and afterward, where players will be able to unlock those for free just by participating in the events that are running as part of the Outlaws loop and release.
One other thing I'd like to add is a new addition we have, which is the mastery event. We all know our current research, the prime research nodes, very valuable nodes that are very hard to access. However, what we've added now are mastery nodes. Mastery nodes work very similar to prime nodes as in their adding very, very valuable, very big bonuses, but they are purely based on engagement. So our LiveOps team has started building a full set of events that are dedicated to only those nodes, and those nodes will only be available through dedicated mastery events.
I wanted to take the time now to ask a few questions which are beyond the content that we had today, and it's questions that the players had, when talking to them on Discord. One of the burning questions that the players are asking from a design point of view is if you can explain how mitigation percentage is calculated.
How deep do you want to go?
That's a twist.
So damage mitigation might be one of the most complex formulas that we have inside the game. So I won't go into the details of the formula. The way I would phrase it is it's all about relationship. Our battleships come with a quite high armor plating. Now, our interceptors are able to pierce through that armor plating through armor piercing. So our combat triangle very much is based on the relationship between those different stats. Damage mitigation formula looks at those two ships and the relationship of the two values. Now, between interceptor and battleship, we're looking at armor piercing versus armor plating. As the relation is important, at a certain point, piling more and more stats don't really make a difference anymore. And this is very much in order to help our lower level players. When our lower level players are attacking a higher level player, they are still able to do damage because there's never a full damage mitigation, no matter how many stats I'm piling on my ship.
Awesome. Yeah, this it's definitely a question that requires either a lot of knowledge or a lot of time. So yeah, thank you for that for the answer. As we know, we have a lot of synergies now that occur with officers, and the players were wondering if this mechanic would ever be implemented in that of ships and armadas. What are your thoughts on if there would be ever a time where the ships would have different either auras that would give buffs to other ships, or that different ships based on their faction would give different buffs to each other, so that the players can kind of mix and match between what ships, not only what level strength the ships are, but also what buffs they have.
Kind of like a synergy between ships.
Correct.
Perhaps.
Exactly.
Of course, next to the game, we're all very avid players of MMOs. And what we know from MMOs are roles within combat. And those are very interesting to us as well. So for the future of you taking a certain ship and a certain combination of officers into the fight against an armada in order to fulfill a role in your alliance, yes, definitely.
On that topic is that we're always looking for new ways for our players to be able to play together. Like the social interactions between our player base is one of the most important pillars that we look at whenever we're thinking about new systems or new loops or new content to put in the game. So I think that there are numerous ways we can do that, and hopefully as time goes on and we introduce more new things, players will start to see that threaded throughout everything that we're introducing.
I want all the things now, Designer Darmok.
Make them happen, please.
We're working on it.
Press
Soon,
that.
TM.
Soon. Uh, awesome. Designers, thank you so much for joining us today. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to say to the players before we sign off? Yeah,
Huge shout out to the players. It's their support that makes the game possible, and we appreciate it and feel it. We're always looking at feedback on Discord, and we do absolutely, even though we don't respond all the time, we do take it into account, and it absolutely has influenced our decisions and the features that have gone into the game and the fixes that have gone into the game. And so it's because of their continued support and their continued excitement about the game that lets us keep going. For me, on an emotional level, at least.
I also want to give a huge shout out to the team. This was a very big milestone, and there's a lot of work that went in here from everyone involved. Our narrative team has built some amazing missions here. I'm really eager for the team, for the players to be able to experience it. There's so much stuff that QA had to go through, so much balancing that the team had to do to make this loop work. And research trees are always quite a lot of work. So I want to give a huge shout out to everyone involved and thank for all of the work.
I'd just like to give a big shout out as well to the players who emptied my station last week. It actually drove me to kind of re-engage in the game even more and have the help and the support of my alliance members. So we are out there, we are playing the game like you as players, and we see what you see on a daily basis. And so yes, thank you for making the world in which that we are creating and living in ourselves so great.
Yeah. Thank you again. Thank you so much, designers, for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to how to actually playing within this loop and to playing with a Stella and this new mechanic. Um, but signing off, commanders, like I wanted to say, as I say in every podcast, join us either in the comments on the YouTube channel here, join us on Discord, join us on Reddit. We'll be there. We'll be answering your questions, and this is a game that lives on conversations with all of you and your feedback. It's not, we don't work in a silo. We work within the realms of our players and what our players are asking. And so those conversations can be made on all the platforms that I'm talking about. Thank you again for listening to this podcast.